He swept the hospital floors for 13 years, and not a single soul ever called him by name. Most staff referred to him as the old janitor, while younger soldiers sometimes joked about the way he limped slightly, dragging one leg as if he'd lost something long ago. He always arrived before dawn, long before the nurses clocked in, and by the time the sun lit up the sterile white walls of the military hospital, he had already polished the hallways and arranged the chairs outside the physical therapy wing with meticulous care. On the morning everything changed, a black car with military insignia pulled up silently. The guards at the gate straightened up. A retired 4-star general, Jacob R. Langston, decorated and once feared on the battlefield, had arrived unannounced for routine checkup. Nurses scrambled to clean his suite. Doctors stood taller. Even the hospital director personally walked to the parking lot to greet him. Inside, down in the lower east wing of the hospital, the old janitor was pushing his mop as usual, humming faintly under his breath. He passed room 113, where a double amputee young Marine had just returned from surgery. The janitor gently adjusted the soldier's blanket without a word and left a cup of water within reach. The Marine didn't notice, few did. Later that morning, the janitor was replacing a flickering hallway light when the retired general, flanked by 2 aides, walked briskly toward radiology. As he passed by the janitor, something strange happened. The general suddenly stopped mid-stride. His eyes locked onto the man on the ladder. He froze. His hand, which had been resting casually on his cane, dropped to his side in a stiff, formal motion. In the hallway filled with nurses, interns, and patients in wheelchairs, General Langston stood straight and saluted. At first, no one moved. A nurse glanced at the janitor, confused. One of the general's aides cleared his throat awkwardly. The janitor, surprised, looked down from the ladder, squinting. He climbed down slowly, set his tool belt aside, and returned the salute with the trembling hand. The hallway erupted in hushed whispers. "Sir," one of the aides whispered, but General Langston's voice was clear and full of weight. "That man carried 5 wounded soldiers through enemy fire. He saved my life at Valley Ridge." Dead silence. For years, people had passed the janitor in the halls without a second thought. No one ever wondered why he wore an old Army-issued wristwatch, or why he never missed the morning flag raising in front of the building. No one asked why he walked with a limp but refused to take the elevator. But General Langston remembered, because the man standing before him in janitor's uniform, now trembling and misty-eyed, was once known as Sergeant Harold H. Cain, a medic in the 7th Infantry, who had been listed MIA after the Valley Ridge assault in 1982, a man whose name had been etched in fading ink on forgotten military rosters, a man who had refused to be buried by silence or medals. Harold didn't speak. He nodded once, respectfully, and quietly returned to his maintenance cart. He didn't like attention. He didn't want stories. But that moment spread through the hospital like fire in dry grass. Doctors who had barely noticed him before began to nod when he passed. Nurses started leaving coffee on his cart. Patients asked to hear about the ridge, though he always smiled and said, "Just doing my job." The truth, however, ran deeper than anyone guessed. Harold had once been a decorated field medic, thrown into one of the deadliest ambushes of the 80s. With communications down, air support delayed, and the unit overrun, Harold dragged soldiers limbless, burned, barely alive, through mud and gunfire, one after another. When the medevac finally arrived, Harold refused to leave until every breathing soldier was on board. The final mortar blast threw him into a crater, burying his radio and breaking 2 ribs. He was never officially debriefed. While recovering in a remote field hospital under a false name, due to clerical error, he watched his unit get disbanded and his records misplaced. Instead of fighting the bureaucracy, Harold disappeared into civilian life. No benefits, no uniform, no flag on his casket when the time comes. Only a mop, a wrinkled photo of his old unit in his locker, and a hallway he kept clean for the next generation of soldiers who might need peace more than medals. The buzz from that morning refused to die down. Throughout the hospital, Harold's name, long buried, spread from one ward to another. Some of the younger medics began whispering, "Did you hear what General Langston said?" Others Googled Valley Ridge 1982, pulling up declassified reports, shaky photos of the jungle, and a long-forgotten commendation list that included one H. Cain, presumed dead. The hospital administrator, realizing the weight of what had happened, requested a meeting. Harold declined. He didn't want ceremonies. He didn't want recognition, back pay, or a press release. He just wanted to sweep the floors, fix the lights, and sit quietly at the back of the chapel during Sunday service. But something had already shifted. Something Harold couldn't mop away. That week, an old soldier in the psych ward left him a hand-drawn thank you card. A single mother recovering from a car accident asked if he could share stories with her son, who dreamed of joining the military. A group of veterans on oxygen tanks wheeled themselves to Harold's hallway just to salute him in silence. He accepted it all with humble nods and downcast eyes. But it was General Langston who returned 3 days later with a leather-bound folder, yellowed photographs, and a trembling hand. He approached Harold without aids, dressed not in his medals, but in civilian slacks and a white shirt. He handed the folder to Harold like one would return a folded flag. Inside were old documents, some declassified, some salvaged from dusty military storage, and a faded photo of their unit, taken hours before the ambush. Harold stared at it for a long time. Some faces were dead. Some were lost. Some, like Langston, had gone on to lead entire commands. But Harold had carried their weight, literally, through fire and blood. "I never got to thank you," the general said softly, "and I'm not the only one." Harold's lips tightened. His hands, aged but still strong, trembled slightly as he held the photo. Then he did something no one had ever seen him do. He wept, not from pain, not from pride, but from the quiet weight of being remembered. Within a week, something remarkable happened. The military hospital, with quiet approval from the Department of Veterans Affairs, named a hallway after him. Not a grand ballroom, not a wing, just a hallway. The one he cleaned every morning at dawn. The one where the general had saluted him. Cain Corridor. The plaque read, "For the man who never asked to be seen, but always showed up." Still, Harold remained Harold. He kept fixing the leaky pipes. He still changed the flickering lights. He still gave cups of water to recovering soldiers without fanfare. But now, people stopped to say hello. They opened doors for him. They asked him to tell their kids what honor meant. Not the kind in parades, but the kind in quiet deeds and forgotten craters. Years later, when Harold passed in his sleep at the modest apartment he had lived in for decades, the hospital staff held a small service. There were no news cameras, no flyovers, just rows of nurses, doctors, former soldiers, and even a young Marine from room 113, now fully recovered, who flew in from another state to speak. He said only one thing: "I came here broken, angry, and silent. I never knew the man who changed my life wasn't a doctor or a counselor. It was the janitor who tucked in my blanket and nodded like he understood." And that was the legacy Harold H. Cain left behind. No monuments, no medals, just a trail of lives made better by a man who swept floors, but once saved a battlefield. A man no one noticed until a general remembered.